Season 3 is gonna be good, guys. Hey guys, coming around for the season finale of Better Call Saul, Season 2, Episode 10, Klick, and I was really looking forward to this episode, obviously, because of the way last week's episode ended, but let's talk about it, because you guys know I absolutely love last week's episode. I think last week's episode is the best episode the show has ever done. It was dramatic, it was sad, it was funny at points. I mean, it really had everything that make Better Call Saul great, and I didn't know this episode would be, I didn't know if this was just going to be like a wrap-up, or how this episode was really going to be, and I will say, this was right up there. I think episode was right up there with it. I don't think it was, I'm not going to say it wasn't as good, because I think it was just as good. This episode was definitely right up there. I mean, this episode was like watching a thriller. It really was like watching a crime thriller like Breaking Bad. This episode was intense as Breaking Bad, and I absolutely love that. I think that's awesome. I love the way they did that, and something I think Better Call Saul just does so well, the way they're able to use dialogue and make it so intense. They did so well in this episode, and really, even though the season was about Jimmy and Kim, the last two episodes have really been focused on Chuck and Jimmy, and really how their relationship has gone, and the way it has been throughout this season. I think they really explored that very well, and really seems to be the key relationship of the show is the relation between Chuck and Jimmy. But let's just get into this episode, because there's a lot to talk about, as usual, and especially the ending. I can't wait to talk about the ending, because the ending is just awesome. It's crazy, but it's awesome as well. So I love the way this episode starts, because we're expecting to start off with, where we left off. We actually go to a flashback, though. We see the final day is actually minutes of Chuck and Jimmy's mom, and they're at her hospital bedside, and Jimmy thinks that they both should stretch their legs and basically go get a sandwich, but Chuck's incredulous that he wants to leave now. He doesn't want to see this, and of course, Jimmy's just trying to lighten the mood, which I did like seeing. Jimmy's not trying to be an asshole here. He's just trying to lighten things up and basically not focus on what the actual problem is, and he talks about how he wants to mistakenly invite two dates to his mom's surprise birthday party, and basically he's just trying to reminisce about the good times before their mom goes. But it's clear that Chuck is way too focused on, the bad. But Jimmy's lark was just another example. Chuck points out of his family being forced to clean up after him. Their mom even had to leave her own celebration to drive one of the girls home. And here's the thing I think this scene shows very well. Jimmy looks at the positives while Chuck always looks at the negatives. And that's going to be a problem, I think, throughout their entire life. Chuck is always going to look at the negative side of things, while Jimmy's going to look at the more positive side. Basically, anything bad that happens, Jimmy's going to try to make light of it and try to make it in some sort of, just make it sound better than it actually is. And that's just who Jimmy is as a person. It's not something that can be changed. It's not something that, is something that I think Chuck can change. I think that's just who Jimmy is, and I think they showed that very well in this episode. So, restless, Jimmy decides to go get that hoagie he tried to talk Chuck into, promises to bring back one for his big brother. That moment that Jimmy leaves, stoic Chuck starts to sob, his shoulders shaking, until Mrs. McGill suddenly wakes up. She calls for Jimmy, but Chuck tells her that he's there, and she says Jimmy's name again and again, basically calling for him. Chuck tells her that he's there, but just as quickly as she woke, she goes silent. She does not want Chuck there, and it really shows how much more people appreciate Jimmy than they do with Chuck, and we've seen that throughout the season. I mean, we saw that with Rebecca, of course, with his wife, how he didn't make her laugh and things like that, but it's really, I think, the way that Chuck just looks at life. He really focuses on the negative, and he doesn't really look at the positive. He kind of just thinks of all the terrible things that happen. He blames everything on Jimmy, and I think they really showed that very well here. Jimmy's in getting lunch while the nurse comes in to turn off the machines. Chuck returns to his stoic state. He moves to the waiting room when Jimmy returns and gets the sad news. He asks if his mom woke up, if she said anything before she died, and Chuck just says no. He doesn't actually tell Jimmy what his mom said, that of course she, said his name. He doesn't actually tell him, and that scene perfectly was a great way to start the episode, because it very much shows the situation that Chuck and Jimmy are in. Jimmy wants to make things sound better than they are. That's just who he is as a person, and Chuck is just basically trying to, basically tell him, no, this is actually what's going on. This is, this is what it is. This is just how it's going to be. So then we see, of course, what we did want to see, and this was going to be crazy. I mean, this was very hard to watch. There were some scenes in this episode that were very hard to watch, and we see back at the coffee shop, Lance, the clerk, and Ernest are trying to tend to the fallen Chuck. Jimmy stands panicking across the street, witnessing his brother's head injury, wondering what he should do, because obviously he wasn't there. He was outside looking in. He doesn't really know if he should really do anything here, but obviously he's the only one that can really save him. So when he sees no one making call 911, he runs over, yells at Lance to call an ambulance, give him something to cushion Chuck's head, and Lance grabs a roll of bubble wrap, of all things, but basically it's the only thing available, and Jimmy runs around the store, turning off all the lights, unplugging all the copy machines. Despite what looked like it could be a fatal conk in his head, Chuck actually wakes up and is surprised to actually see Jimmy. Chuck's okay, which I was surprised by. I thought Chuck was going to die, but no, Chuck is awake, and that makes this episode all the better, because like I said, this episode really is focused on Chuck and Jimmy's relationship, where it goes from here, how it is overall, and if it can ever be changed, which I think this episode proves that it's a very toxic relationship, and there's no way you can really change it. So, he's surprised to see that Jimmy's there. He didn't think that Jimmy really cared about him, especially after the whole debacle with what Jimmy did and that whole fight they got into. He really doesn't think that Jimmy cares, and I'm glad to see, you can see that Jimmy really does care about his brother. I mean, he's his brother. He wants to help him. Even though his brother is an asshole, he still does want to help him. And the next thing Chuck sees is the harsh light of the ER as he's being wheeled in the hospital, which very well done the way this was. I love that this was all in Chuck's perspective. Like, all those scenes of the bright light, it was all in Chuck's view. You could tell what Chuck was feeling. The bright light obviously is, resistant to heat. And the scene where they're talking about how they need to perform these tests and CAT scans, I mean, Chuck, obviously, he's freaking out. They don't really know how sensitive to metal he is. And he's crying, yelling, and finally has to be restrained, as they mentioned in EKG, and he's obviously freaking out. He tries to tell them about his hypersensitivity to electricity. They are not listening. They think that they know what they're doing. They don't think that anything's going to be wrong here, but Chuck's trying to tell him, look, I have problems. I'm heat resistant. I can't be exposed to electricity, and he's trying to tell him everything that's going on there. A very well done scene. I definitely really did enjoy. As much you guys might not like Chuck, I think this episode really showed, why we are so sympathetic for Chuck. So Jimmy's talking to Dr. Cruz. The doctor treated Chuck in season 1. She tells Jimmy they're in the same situation where Chuck is refusing to have certain tests performed, and that really is what's going on. He doesn't want to have these tests performed, therefore they can't do that. And Jimmy cuts her off, saying point blank he will not commit his brother. He's willing to get a temporal emergency guardianship, though, because Dr. Cruz says she can't know how extensive his injuries may be without the tests. And it's just a standard procedure. It's something they need to run. He needs to get a CAT scan, and Chuck can't really bail out of this. Unfortunately, he wants to. He can't really do anything about this, and it really sucks, obviously. There's really nothing that can happen here, unfortunately. He can't really do anything, and because of that, obviously, this really is a terrible position for both Jimmy and Chuck to be in. So, he has a doctor to let him tell Chuck about the TEG, and Chuck says if Johnny isn't on the spot, and when Jimmy enters his room, he's still in neck brace, his hands are restrained, and he immediately calls for Ernest when Ernie is in the bathroom. Chuck asks, is in the room, Chuck asks how long he was on the floor at the copy shop before the ambulance arrived. You can basically see that Chuck is depending on Ernest. He does not want Jimmy to help him. He wants Ernest. He thinks Ernest is going to help him, but as we know, Ernest doesn't really know what's going on with Chuck. He doesn't really, he knew Chuck wasn't well, obviously, but he hasn't seen what Jimmy has. Jimmy's had to deal with this for a long time of his life. He's had to deal with this for a while now. He's cared for Chuck. He's done these things for him, and Ernest really can't do that, because Ernest doesn't have that relationship. He doesn't have that experience, and that's the thing that Ernest can do that Chuck can. I think this episode very well showed that. While Chuck does want Ernest, Ernest cannot help him in the way that Jimmy can. Whether Chuck wants him to or not, that's just the situation, and Chuck needs to understand that. So basically, that sets Chuck on a rant, saying the only way Jimmy could arrive before the ambulance is that he never left. He must have been there bribing Lance to say he never been there before. And Chuck tells him, and he thinks Jimmy stuck around because he wants to see him suffer, have a laugh at his expense. He basically, again, just jumping to conclusions, not even thinking about the positive outcome, thinking about the worst outcome possible. And that's just something that Chuck does. He thinks about the worst outcomes. He thinks about the worst things that have happened. He's a very negative person. I think they really showed that very well here. We've known Chuck to be very serious, and in the same way that Jimmy's silly and Chuck's not, just little things like that, I thought they showed very well. I definitely really did love that. And the other thing I loved is, basically, I think the reason that Rebecca didn't laugh at Chuck's joke is because he has no wit. He has no wit like Jimmy does. He doesn't look at things in a positive way, and his jokes really aren't funny because he himself doesn't, enjoy humor. He enjoys serious stuff, and he very much takes everything seriously. And Ernie does correct him, basically telling him exactly what's going on, but he tells Chuck he called Jimmy because he was worried, and that's why he's there. But Chuck doesn't believe him. He thinks that Jimmy just told him to say this, and I get that Chuck has this, idea of who Jimmy really is and what's going on there. He's, he thinks very ill of him right now, but he is just being very stubborn. He doesn't want to listen to Ernie. He doesn't think that Ernie's telling the truth, and he's so angry, he orders both of his visitors from his room out, and before Jimmy leaves, he tells Chuck about the TEG, and Chuck says he finally got him where he wanted him, and yes, in many ways, Chuck did get the payback that he deserved. That very much is what's going on. But you can tell that Jimmy does feel very guilty. He knows that a lot of this is his fault. He knows a lot of this could have been prevented. And I think that's really the situation with Jimmy, is that he knows that he did wrong. He really can't do anything about it, unfortunately. And obviously, he feels really bad about it. You can definitely tell. So Jimmy sees Ernie in the hallway, asks why he lied for him, because obviously, it's not the truth. We know that, in fact, he didn't actually do that. He was actually there trying to tell the store owner what to do. Now, he wasn't trying to hurt Chuck, obviously. That's not what he was trying to do, but he was trying to get the store owner to be like, oh, he was never there. So he asks Ernie point blank, why'd you lie for me? And he says he didn't want him to say anything, but his brother, the way he's been talking about him, it's like he's really out to get him. And Ernie says he doesn't know. He says that Jimmy is his friend. It's very interesting. You can see that Ernie really does care for Jimmy. Even though he's been basically, forced to take care of Chuck, he can't do it anymore. He just can't he takes care of him, but he just doesn't have the connection he does to Jimmy. Jimmy's more of an approachable person. Jimmy's more someone you want to be your friend, while Chuck is the guy that is with Jimmy, but you kind of just don't want to talk to. He's that guy that's like, in the back. How can I explain this the best? Okay. When you're at a party, and there's some people you don't want to talk to, and there's some people that you don't want to talk to, Chuck is the guy that's in the back that no one is talking to. He's just there. He's not really associated with them. He's only there because he has connections to other people, and nobody really is talking to him. And in many ways, that is exactly what's going on with Chuck. Chuck is in this position where nobody is on his side because of the way he perceives things. If Chuck perceived things in maybe a more positive way, or maybe said things in a different way and not state things as bluntly as he did, then I think more people would ally with him. But because of how approachable Jimmy is and the way that Jimmy is, they prefer his brother over him. And that's kind of just a situation I think Chuck's had to face all his life, and it's really starting to piss him off, you can definitely tell. And it is something that he's been annoyed by, and that really is why he has, I think, the rage for Jimmy that he does, because all his life, he's had to face people preferring Jimmy over him. I mean, to me, this is one of those situations where people would probably go to their house just to see Jimmy. Like, Chuck would invite them, but they go just to see Jimmy. It's one of those situations. When you have, like, that brother that's so much more popular than you, and you're just not as popular. I wouldn't know personally, because I'm an only child. I don't have a brother or sister, but that's very much what I saw it as. Chuck's that guy in the party that he's only there because he has connections to certain people, or he's that brother that is constantly, just his brother is more favored over him. That's very much what's going on with him. So we do get a lot, actually, with the commercial in this episode. The most we get with Kim is seeing, actually, Jimmy and Kim happy. We see that things are relatively good between them, which I did like seeing. They're waiting at the hospital with the results of Chuck's tests, and Jimmy's commercial comes on TV, and it's pure showmanship. A roundup of his elderly clients, including Mrs. Strauss and Major Fudge, saying, "Gimme Jimmy" for all their lawyering needs. He got to do it on his own. He didn't need, no one is forcing him to do this. He didn't do it for anyone. Given where he is and why he's there, he cringes a bit when the commercial's tagline promises that he's Jimmy McGill, a lawyer you can trust, because he knows that he can't be trusted. And I like that Jimmy deep down knows he did wrong. He knows that he's the reason for all this. He knows that he, has hurt Chuck, and he knows that he probably could have done this differently. But he wanted to do whatever he can to make sure that, Kim got what she deserved, because Kim totally did get what she deserved. She was the one that wanted Mason Verde. She worked so hard for it. And like I said, yes, Jimmy didn't really see Kim work so hard for it, and he doesn't realize how, hard it took her, and how, all the effortless work that she did. He doesn't know about any of that, but he does know that this is something that she really wanted, and she almost had it. Chuck took it, Chuck took it from her, and luckily she now has it. So, when his telephone number flashes on the screen, he takes his phone out of his pocket and turns it off, and Cruzen comes out with the results of Chuck's test, and the news is good. There's no signs of stroke or a cardiac arrest. His heart is strong, she says, and she thinks he essentially just had a panic attack, and in many ways, that's what's going on. Chuck panicked, he thought the worst, and because of that, it just made him have this attack, and the chaos and trauma of the ER and the tests have sent Chuck into a state, a basically self-induced catatonia, and I don't really know if he's going to be able to get out of it. I mean, the rest of this episode, Chuck is very catatonic, you can tell, and Jimmy says he's not leaving his brother's side until he comes out of it. Chuck does 20 hours later, and he assumes Jimmy's now going to send him to some insane asylum in Las Cruces, someplace that he can tuck him away for good, but Jimmy tells him that the TNTG really did mean temporary to him, and he basically takes Chuck back to his home. He doesn't want to do anything bad to him. He basically just wants to help him, and again, Chuck is just thinking of the worst. He thinks Jimmy's out to get him, when in reality, it's really the other way around. Chuck is coming across as wanting to go after Jimmy, and he's accusing Jimmy of wanting to come after him, and It's very fascinating the way that was done here. Jimmy then fusses over him for a few minutes before Chuck finally tells him he wants to be left alone after all the poking and prodding he suffered at the hospital. He just doesn't want anything to do. I mean, obviously Chuck was, had a lot that happened in the hospital he was not okay with. They obviously operated on him. They did things that he just was not, did not want them to do. And before Chuck finally tells him he wants to be left alone after all the poking and prying he suffered at the hospital, Jimmy agrees to leave, and I like that he did agree to leave. Again, there are things in this episode that show that Jimmy is not a bad person. The fact that Jimmy wants to stick by his brother, the fact that he went to the hospital, the fact that he even agreed to leave. I mean, you can tell that Jimmy really deep down is a good person. He just wanted to do that. He really just wanted this for his girlfriend because he felt that she deserved it after everything he put her through and everything she worked for, and it just didn't end in the way he wanted to. That really is what this is about. It's all about consequence, and I think Jimmy really is starting to understand the idea of consequences, that his actions do have consequences. I think he's really starting to see that here. So Chuck nods right after, but after, basically, Jimmy agrees to leave, and if Chuck agrees to call Ernie, basically, he says he's going to leave if Chuck calls Ernie, and obviously Chuck nods, but right after Jimmy checks out, Chuck grabs his space plane, goes to his garage, he rummages around the contents, and a lot of things that run on electricity, of course, and until he finds out what he was looking for, and picks it out of the box with a pair of tongs, and we don't know exactly what it was. We know there's something else up Chuck's sleeve, and I definitely really love that. But before we get back into that, let's get to Mike really quickly, because we did see some stuff with Mike in this episode. Most of this episode with Mike is just him basically trying to go after Hector in the best way he can, and he has been scoping out Nacho and Hector's activities, and after he sees Nacho and Arturo take the Regalo Helado truck driver into the desert, he goes to the gun dealer, Lawson, and purchases a powerful weapon, and, Mike did in fact kill the truck driver, if you guys, are wondering. He did in fact kill him, and after practicing his shot with Lawson, he takes the gun to the area where Tio, Nacho, the cousins, and Arturo are with the ice cream driver. A very well done scene. I liked a lot of this episode, just seeing him aiming like the sniper, not really knowing what to do. Should he kill? Should he not? I mean, he really wants to get over what he did, and he watches through the scope as Lionel and Marco kill the driver, and Arturo buries him near a small, depleted house, and, he didn't kill the driver, obviously. Mike did not kill the driver. They killed the driver, and it's very hard to see, and at one point, Nacho's staying beside Tio, when something far away catches his eye, and you're wondering, does he spot Mike? Is it his rifle? But maybe because Nacho doesn't leave Tio's side, perhaps making sure Mike can't get a good shot off of his enemy, you really think that he is seeing Mike, and Mike's growing very frustrated with the situation. Looks like he might have to resign himself to skipping an assassination attempt for the day, and when he hears his car horn starts to blare, he takes his gun, slowly, carefully makes his way back to his parking spot with a pistol drawn, only to find someone has wedged a stick into the steering wheel to make a horn go off. He throws the stick away, then finds someone else has also left him a note and stuck it on his windshield, and the message simply says, "Don't," and that's what we get with Mike in this episode. I was perfectly fine with that, because we've really been building to this conclusion, and I like that we didn't get it. Mike wants closure, and that's exactly what he doesn't get to get. He doesn't get to have closure because what he wants, again, it has consequences, just like what Jimmy is doing, and I think Mike has always known that, but as we know, he will do whatever it takes for his family. And this letter, I think, is either from Nacho or it's from Stacy. I think it's definitely from Nacho. I think Nacho's telling him, don't go through this, don't kill Tio, it's not going to end well for you, you're not doing yourself any favors if you do this, and basically that's what the message is. It's saying don't, or is it that Nacho already did something? I mean, we know that Hector ends up in a wheelchair, so I'm kind of wondering, was Nacho allying with Hector just to hurt him and possibly severely hurt him and get him, basically do what Mike would have done already? Or is he, generally telling Mike, don't go through with this? There's obviously a reason behind that. I do think Nacho sent him that letter, but I can't wait to see what happens there. That's all we give Mike in this episode. I was perfectly fine with it. A lot of people said, oh, we didn't get enough Mike in this episode, but I thought that was the perfect amount. First of all, yes, Mike was a big part of this season, but I do think we got enough of his storyline in this season. A lot of his storyline has been, should I go after, should I not? It's been a very, complex situation, and it would only make sense for this not to work out the way that Mike wants, and for it to not even get resolved, because obviously it's very dangerous, it's not very safe what he's doing, and it could have a lot of ramifications that I don't think Mike is prepared for, and I don't really think he's thinking it through as well as he should, and I think this definitely shows that he needs to think it through. This is definitely a problem. It's something that he needs to do something about, and he's not really doing anything. So, and he can't go through with killing Tio. I think that's exactly what that message says, don't kill him. So, which we know obviously doesn't die, but at the same time, it's a very well done scene. So, Basically, then we get to the climax of this episode, which is just insane. Like I said, remember how I said at the beginning of this video that this episode was as intense as Breaking Bad? This is why. I mean, last week's episode, yes, it was very intense with Chuck's downfall, whatnot. That probably my favorite scene this entire season was that, but... And, you know, my favorite episode of the season was episode 9. But if I had to pick a favorite scene from the season, the scene that I really thinks defined Chuck's and Jimmy's relationship, it would be this final scene. Everything about this final scene is gold. Everything about it perfectly defines the relationship. Everything shows who they both are as people and what's going to end up happening for the two and if they can really turn things around. It really does show that. So we see at their shared offices where Jimmy's commercial has already netted a waiting room full of clients. We see there's tons of clients there, and he basically has to leave it all to Kim to deal with. Obviously, there are tons of clients because of the commercial, which has worked fundamentally, and you think things are good between him and Kim, but then he gets a call from Hamlin, who asks him, who's holding this letter in his hand, and he asks him point blank, are you behind this? And you have no idea what he's talking about. You're thinking it's about the letter of resignation from Chuck because he knows there's a letter of resignation, which obviously Jimmy did himself, and Jimmy speeds to Chuck's house. He has no idea what's going on because he did not write this letter of resignation, and the locks have been changed, though, so he has to pound on the door, and you can tell that Chuck just doesn't want him there. Chuck told him to leave. He doesn't want anything to do with him, and have Chuck tell him to come back later, pound on the door some more before he can gain entry. It's honestly a really devastating scene. The fact that Chuck won't even let in his own brother is really sad to think about, but once he does, he finds Chuck in the middle of the home makeover project. He's taping space blankets all over the walls to further protect himself from electricity, and Chuck says that he really needs is a proper Faraday cage, and the fact that he's climbed up on a ladder to try to create one alerts Jimmy that he's not in a good state of mind. He doesn't really know how, but he knows that just something is just not right. I mean, the way that Chuck is acting, it just doesn't seem right. And even though Chuck, like I said, this season, you know, he looks at the negatives, he's even worse here, definitely. He knows there's something more going on. So Jimmy finally gets him to take a break, and as they sit on the couch, they basically just have this conversation. They discuss everything that's been going on all season, the conversation that you knew they were eventually gonna have, and I don't really think there was a way for Jimmy to evidently, you know, get away from this. You know, we'll talk about that. It was kind of inevitable. So Jimmy addresses Chuck's resignation or retirement, and as he's calling it, he just retired from HHM, but not from the law, and that's not good. Basically, you know, he says, you know, he's basically telling Chuck that he wants to retire, and, you know, basically Chuck saying that he wants to retire forever, and Jimmy says that, you know, he wants to retire from HHM, but not from the law. It's not good, and he says he doesn't know what he is, but he is not a lawyer. You know, he doesn't know what he is if he's not a lawyer, because that's what Chuck is wanting to do. We remember the scene with Chuck last year when he told Jimmy, you're not a real lawyer. What is Chuck then? If Chuck is going to basically say, look, I don't want to be a lawyer, then what the hell is he? I mean, Jimmy doesn't see his brother as anything that's not a lawyer because that's who he's known Chuck to be, and that's just who Chuck has been to him this whole time. You know, he's always aspired to be like Chuck, and in many ways, I didn't just see this as Jimmy basically telling his brother, you know, I need you to do what you do best. I need you to continue being a lawyer. Jimmy's also kind of always looked up to Chuck. Chuck is his older brother, as we know. You know, he's always looked up to him. He's always wanted to aspire to be like Chuck. Even though Chuck does focus on things, you know, in a negative way, I think he does want to aspire to be like Chuck. And he wants to be, you know, as well-rounded as Chuck. He wants to be as successful as Chuck. And if Chuck is not a lawyer, this kind of ruins Jimmy in many ways. Because Jimmy doesn't really know who to look up to. Jimmy doesn't really know who to aspire from. And this really changes his relation with his brother if he doesn't want to be a lawyer. And I love the scene where Jimmy's saying, look, you can retire when you're 90, but you can't retire as long as, you know, I'm here. And Jimmy tries to joke with Chuck, telling him he can't quit the law until he's gotten him disbarred and run out of town, because otherwise he'd be the sole McGill practicing law in the area. Of course, Chuck doesn't respond to it because, again, Chuck doesn't take jokes. He doesn't find his humor funny. And he doesn't understand his humor either. He just doesn't have that wit for humor that Jimmy does. So when it doesn't work, he asks Chuck if this is all about the Mesa Verde files. He says he didn't do what Chuck accused him of, but if Chuck really thinks he did it, he should get angry and fight back, retire for Chuck, and Jimmy says can only come when he's 99. That's when he can retire, and giving close arguments to Judge Bot 3000, which will run electricity. And again, Jimmy's trying to be funny here. He's trying to make light of the situation, but there is no making light of the situation here. Everything about Jimmy's, you know, charm and his humor, Chuck just doesn't see it. And I don't think Chuck's ever seen it. I don't think this is something new. Chuck has never really seen Jimmy's humor. But at this point, Chuck is not only not one for Jimmy's humor, he doesn't want Jimmy to talk, basically. He knows what he wants to do. And he finally admits he feels that he's actually not up to the job anymore. He just doesn't feel he's right for it. You know, after transporting these address numbers and then trying to blame it on Jimmy, he says that it's the electricity's fault and it's wearing him down, it's wearing his faculties, his brain, his mind. It used to work, and now it doesn't anymore, and as people got hurt because of him, it's time to end it, and he just feels the best thing to do is just retire. He wants to leave because he just feels that it's just going to make the situation worse. The longer that he's a lawyer, the worse he'll be making things, and he doesn't want to do that. So finally overcome with guilt of what he did, Jimmy does in fact confess to what he did, which is a huge scene, but again, you know he was eventually going to do. He just couldn't run away from it, and he does in fact confess everything he did, that he was one responsible for Mesa Verde, and he tells Chuck that he says he changed 1261 to 1216. It was him. It went all down exactly like he said. Exactly. And is insane. He asks him if it's insane how he got every detail right, so he can relax. And basically, Chuck asks Jimmy to confirm this is the truth, that he's not just saying all this to make Chuck feel better. And Jimmy tells him straight out, I am telling you to make you feel better. He's not just saying this, he's not just saying this because Chuck wants him to hear it. He is in fact telling him this, and he says he wouldn't be telling him otherwise, but yes, it's the truth. And Chuck then asked why'd he go to such lengths to humiliate him, and that's not why he did it. Jimmy knows deep down, he never did this to humiliate Chuck. He did it for Kim, and he tells Chuck that he wanted for Kim. This was Kim's. It was her that should do it. It wasn't HHM. It wasn't Hamlin's. It wasn't him. It was her that wanted Mesa Verde for their company, and he basically tried to steal it from her. I mean, he can't admit he didn't do that. We know episode 8, Chuck was planning to steal Mesa Verde from Kim because he didn't feel that he didn't want them to be successful. He made that very clear that he did not want Wexler and McGill to be successful at all. He doesn't even care that Kim was wrong, and even though he seems to kind of appreciate Kim, he now has no appreciation for her. I don't think it's because G's just sided with Jimmy. I think it just simply just doesn't want to support, Wexler and McGill. Anything his brother's a part of, he just doesn't want to support. So he says he didn't think Chuck would be this hurt by the situation, expecting he would just say that he made a mistake and go on with his life, because that's what a normal person does. I mean, in many ways, yeah, Jimmy just made a mistake. Jimmy was doing things in a good way. And yes, this is a big deal, obviously, what he did. I mean, obviously, he did salvage his brother's job, he did all these terrible things, and he made him basically look like an idiot. But he didn't fundamentally do anything that bad. He did it for a good reason, and Chuck just doesn't see it that way. Again, he doesn't see that good reasoning. He sees it as Jimmy just doing something because he just sees that Jimmy wanted to do something because he wanted to sabotage him. He doesn't see it as Jimmy really trying to help someone, which we know deep down is what Jimmy really wanted to do, but at this point, Chuck just doesn't want to listen to him because he thinks he knows what he's talking about. So he then has Chuck confirm he isn't going to retire, says he's going to call Hamlin and share the news with him, but first Chuck has another question, and this is when things is crazy, because Chuck just says, did he just confess to a felony? And Jimmy says that he does, but he feels better. Besides, it's his word against his, and Jimmy just leaves. He doesn't really think much of it. He thinks that, now they're okay. They finally confess what's going on with Chuck, and maybe they can actually be better now. Maybe things can actually work. Maybe they can just move on, and then you see that is not at all what Chuck was planning on doing. Chuck is not doing this to get Jimmy to confess. He was not doing this to, make himself feel better. We see we see that thing that Chuck looked for in his garage, because we want to know what it was, and it is a tape recorder, and he is hidden under some material on the coffee table, and when Jimmy leaves the room, Chuck gets up, turns the recorder off, and that is how this season ends, and holy shit, Chuck, what a dick move. I mean, yes, I get what Chuck was trying to do. He wants to sabotage Jimmy. He wanted to show that Jimmy was telling the truth. He wanted to keep his job. But holy shit, I mean, I can't believe that Chuck would do this. But it's crazy that Chuck would actually do something like this. I mean, we've always known Chuck to be against Jimmy, but this is a new low. He went way too far. He should not have recorded Jimmy. That conversation did not even record. There was no way for him to do that. Nobody told him to do that. Nobody wanted him to do that. And this has just ended up really badly now. There is absolutely no way that Jimmy and Chuck are going to be the way that Jimmy wants me. I think Jimmy just wants Chuck to be a regular brother. He wants him to care about him, and he wants Chuck to obviously look out for him, but he doesn't need him to have this constant concern that he's not good at what he's doing. He does care about Chuck, obviously. You can tell very well in this episode, but he did do it to protect his girlfriend, because he cares about Kim just as much as he cares about Chuck. Maybe even more than he cares about Chuck, because Kim really does believe in him. And Kim and him, yes, they have a rough season, but in many ways, what he did for Kim has really affected his relationship with Chuck. And now we're wondering what he's going to do. I mean, he recorded it, so is he going to give this to Hamlin? Is he going to possibly go to court? I mean, there are a lot of possibilities of what could happen with Chuck and Jimmy. But without a doubt, the show is going to be Chuck versus Jimmy next season. I mean, there's absolutely no way that it's not going to be. Is Chuck even going to tell Jimmy he did this? Is this something that Jimmy's got to find out? I mean, obviously, he recorded it, so Jimmy's got to find out at some point. We'll have to see what happens there. Says he possibly wants him to jail. I mean, there are a lot of possibilities of what could happen here. I don't really know what Chuck plans on doing, but there, like I said, there are a lot of possibilities, and I'm definitely wondering what's going to happen there, why how Jimmy's going to react to this, how that relationship's going to change, and also what's Kim going to do, because Kim took Jimmy's side, as we know. We know that Kim took Jimmy's side. We know that Kim helped Jimmy, and what is she going to do when she realizes that Jimmy actually confessed to Chuck? I mean, obviously, things I don't think are going to be good here. She's going to tell Jimmy, why would you do this? Why would you confess to him? You knew you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have allied with Chuck. You should have left him alone. And you can tell right away she does not trust Chuck, definitely. She does not want Chuck near Jimmy. She does not trust Chuck. And she basically wants to wherever she can to protect Jimmy. Even though she, thinks that Chuck is on the right side of things, I do think that she obviously does want to protect Jimmy first and Chuck second. That's kind of how she is. So, obviously, incredible stuff. I definitely really did enjoy that. We'll have to see what happens there. And then as far as Mike goes, who did write him the note? I think it was Nacho, but like I said, the question is, did Nacho write him this note because he doesn't want him to kill Hector, or did he do something worse to Hector? Like, I kind of feel like Nacho is the one that put Hector in the wheelchair. It just makes sense. Mike is not that vicious. We know Mike has done some questionable things. We know Mike has been a very corrupted cop, and that he has a rage, but as we know, he didn't kill that ice cream driver, that driver. He did not kill the driver. It was, in fact, the guys that killed the driver. He did not kill the driver, and because of that, they really just show that I don't think Mike is capable of doing something that vicious. I'm not really sure. I mean, I know as Breaking Bad goes on, he gets a lot more corrupted and a lot more scary, but I don't really know if Mike is the one that put Hector in the chair. I kind of feel like Nacho did it already, and he's telling Mike, don't go through this. I already put him in the chair. He's weakened. There's no way we can now stop him, and I'm wondering to see really what's going to happen there. It's going to be very interesting what happened with Mike. I think we just saw enough that we need to see there. I definitely really did love that. And then as far as Chuck goes, does Chuck really not want to be a lawyer anymore? I mean, we had that whole scene with Chuck and everything. Jimmy, I think, really wants to repair this relationship. He's tired of them being, at each other's throats. He really wants to fix things, but I think this really does show that there is no way of them fixing things whatsoever. Even if they want to, there is no way of doing that. So overall, guys, amazing episode. Let's talk about the season overall. For me, I think the season was much better than last season. I love last season. It was a great introduction season. It was probably as perfect as a season 1 can get. I absolutely love season 1. Season 2 was just that much better. I mean, I loved everything about it. It was character driven. It was interesting. I got more invested in the character this season. I got more invested in the storyline that was going on. It was more intense. There was more interaction, especially with Jimmy and Kim. They focused a lot more on that relation, which I was very happy about. They really, I think, focused on everything we needed them to, and I think next season we're really going to start to see why Jimmy does end up fundamentally breaking bad. I think mainly because of the fact that if Chuck isn't going to be a lawyer, he means nothing to him, and I think Jimmy's going to leave basically to get away from Chuck. He's going to hide out on his own. He's going to become Saul, and that's how he becomes Saul, basically. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. Overall, guys, I'm going to saw this season and this episode in general. I absolutely love this episode, this season, and like I said, was incredible. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'd love to even start a conversation. I'd love to talk about with you guys. Like I said, I absolutely love this season, and we'll see you guys in my next video, which will be for tonight's episode of The Flash, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.